Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. So I was very, very surprised at the very beginning that someone just recognized our study and thinking about presenting what we found out and discussed within the Swiss context, just to show you maybe as a guideline or some ideas for India. So when we started this study, that was about 3 years ago, that was an impulse coming from companies. So we had a little workshop on talking about the combined transport in Switzerland. So there was railway, road, traffic in there. So all leading guys from Swiss companies. I will show you some logo afterwards and just say who was in there. And that was the main drive, just to think about in this workshop. We need an integrated vision. What is traffic? What is mobility about? So, and therefore we not thought about only freight, because this was the workshop about. We were talking about freight. By the way, in this conference we only had one freight session, because freight is also a very, very special part of transportation and mobility. And so we thought, okay, it would be a good idea to have an integrated view on mobility of goods and passengers or persons. And that was the main idea, doing such kind of study. So, and now the study is just finished for more than 1 year, and I'm quite happy to see that the developments which are going on, and we have heard these also in this Swiss session, are going on, and they are quite faster than we ever thought. So 2050 may be now 2040 or 2030 or even earlier. So at some certain points. So just let me start the introduction. I'm already in. I have some other points then to just show you the nature and the kind of study that we made. We built a reference scenario that we thought of. That would be the scenario that would be great to have in 2050. So that could the vision, the real vision, to be mobility in 2050, that would be resulting in these kind of goal thesis. That we say that is the goal. The reference would be we're doing nothing. It just goes on, as we heard also. The capacity are just going to the really limits, and what would happen then? That was the reference. And there will be a gap. And to fill this gap, we thought about actions. Recommended actions. And overall, we had then 38 theses and 44 actions. And you can see I cannot show them all. So I'll just give you a glance about what we thought about, and so that you have an idea. And I think this could be a nice example how to get a joint vision and have a kind of basis for planning at the very end. What are the key points that we have to think about to have an integrated mobility concept? So, let's go into the point. As we have heard also, so for those of you who have been here this morning also, so we need high-quality transportation systems. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this conference. We are all clear on that. So we have a continuously rising demand. And so in Switzerland, so I'm talking about Switzerland, these systems come to their limit. And this is the point that we were discussing about as a major pain point, so to say. As I have also learned, in India you have the same points too, but only on a different level. So we're talking mainly about the same problems, but the context is completely different. But maybe, so we have some joint questions and also some joint answers at the very end. So there is a need for an integrated approach for designing multimodal systems, But in Switzerland, we have a kind of separated approach. So we have a federal office for road transport. We have a federal office for train transportation or rail transportation. So we have a quite of separation of modes within planning. So there was also the idea about how could we integrate these views to have an integrated planning process. So these were mainly points that were also discussed within this workshop, what I really named at the very beginning. So the impulse was to generate a first vision, what are the key points that we have to think about, and not to solve the whole problem, but to give a kind of landscape, what are the points? And I'll give you some insights. Intentionally, we did not integrate politics into this process. Intentionally, we did not. We only wanted to have companies in there, companies in passenger transport, companies in freight transport, and also companies from the retail side, because they have the necessity for transportation, or from the production side. So that we try to have in all stakeholders which could say something how they would like to have mobility in 2050. So it's not the university view, so it was done by the University of St. Gallen from my institute and the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. So the guys planning transportation on rail and passenger transportation. So we tried also on the scientific side to have these two views on there. So you can also see that Swiss Rail was also part of it, working with us. And so other companies like Swiss Post, you have seen also. Swiss Post, also the freight branch, as well as the passenger transportation. So the Swiss Post Auto, we have seen today also. DHL is a name you may have heard. And so several other companies involved. Also, like companies like Siemens, and this was especially the train part or train branch in here. So, a little bit about the method that we really used. I just explained it a little bit at the very start. If you look at kind of studies for making visions, they typically use like kind of backcasting, they call this. So at least, may all know this forecasting. Try to get out what is in the future, making a kind of forecast. So the first point was, yes, we were thinking about, that was the point one, where are we now? What are the basic numbers, traffic and transportation that we have at the current level, and what numbers do we have for building the future? So all these prognosis of transportation and stuff like that. Then we built a so-called, as I said before, reference scenario by taking all studies that we have, first of all. So literature review, studies that we just find, articles, and so on and so on. So the scientific approach. And by doing this, we also asked all the experts from these companies and made workshops with those to develop also a qualitative scenario, not only the hard numbers, but also what they think regarding their business, what will be in 2050. And that's a quite long distance, and we just felt this also in this whole process. Not all were really able to think about 2050. When you are in these basic operations now, think about 2050, so that's quite far ahead. But after all, we made several points up and built such kind of reference scenario. The next point was to go into this discussion and think about what would you think would be best for 2050 in terms of mobility. So that was even a harder question, and so we had several workshops with these practical guys and thinking about the things. And our work was to structure all this, to give some impulses, thematical impulses into this process, and to guide this discussion. And also thinking about what do you think about the development, about the quantitative development of transportation in the future. And of course, this is not a representative thing because we have a closed shop of companies in there. So we did not ask the whole Switzerland, but some relevant companies of Switzerland and quite big ones. So therefore, we had this projected target image. So our goal, this could be mobility in 2050. This is kind of a vision that we made. And then the last question that we had to think about, so where is the delta? So what is different to the business as usual concept? And what are the means? So that was at least the backcasting. When we are looking back at now, what do we have to do to reach this goal? That was the idea, so to say, the method that we had behind. And you see it was mainly qualitative because the time frame from at that time 2014 to 2050, you cannot really model in that way. But we had this kind of modeling behind it, like Excel sheets and different topics and trying to weigh it and so on, and just to show in this huge amount of data just to get it handled. So you could see now how we build it. This is kind of excerpt out of it. We looked at different trends. So it's so small here, I have to look up there. Like increase in urban sprawl. So what effect does this have on road transportation, passenger, road transportation, freight, rail transportation, freight, passenger transportation on rail, and so on and so on. All these modes, we're just trying to figure out this, and these were only an excerpt of these. So, like also topics like the prevalence of all alternatives drives, capacity expansion of infrastructure. So all these trends that we were just discussing, would this happen, and what effect would this have on our vision at the very end? So you could see then that we, for each of the transportation modes, and this is an example that I have for the goods transportation on roads. So we just try to weigh which is going heavier. So will it go up in the transportation, or will it even go down in 2050? So only a little bit illustrated like this, because we weighed each factor, and then we had an all-over number, and then we could see, okay, it will overall go up or even go down. That was the idea behind it. You can see it here that when the flexibility against rail just goes up, so we will have an intensifying trend, so that means enhancing road transportation. Yeah. On the other side, if you see that there is an infrastructure blackout on road transportation, that will enhance more the rail transportation on the other side. So these are the things that we have thought about, only to give you a glance what we discussed. And this we did for all factors that we found out, and this we did for all transportation modes at the very end. What we also did is we asked the experts what they think what will be transportation growth until 2050, because we did not have the numbers for 2050. We only had them for 2030 or 2035. That were the official data that we had. And we did this in kind of practical. We asked them just to make a point on a scale. What do they think? And then we tried to calculate a kind of average on this. That was the very, very easy way of doing this. And we could see, for example, just the most upper number is passenger transport in the public transport. There should have been not ÖV, but public transport, PT. You could see that the basic scenario of the official studies that we had would say a plus of 118% by 2035, and 2030, and by 2050, with our experts, we would say we are about 138%. That was the idea behind it. So we had some basic numbers, And then we had some assumptions at the very end. So how does good transport, road transport, and so on develop till the year 2050? And as also not going through it all, to give you a glance. So, for example, in Switzerland, with a partial withdrawal of the night driving ban, as you may know that you're not allowed to drive at night by truck in Switzerland. So it's forbidden between 10 and 10 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning, except maybe retail products and postal services and so on, but the others are not must not drive. And at least you can think about that low-emission vehicles could be allowed to do this in that time to enhance capacity and to give an incentive to buy these and to use these. And when we see what we see now is that the shipping volumes increasingly go down. So we have less shipping volumes because of e-business and stuff like that. So you could think about that the intensity of road transportation would go up. So only these were topics behind it that were qualitatively seen and brought us to this number at the very end. So this we did for all these transportation modes. What we then saw is the main problems is, again, the mobility system will come to its very end. So we cannot do this like this. We have to think about what is to change because capacity will be limited. That's the basic. So there are different things also, like how do we do the decision-making in Switzerland? So how come we come to this? We have to have an integrated view and so on and so on. So because of the time and trying to speed up a little bit in that way. So the risk was there to do the same as we do now, again and again. So more of the same we were missing the sustainability in the transportation system. So we have to think about changing some things. And these were the gaps that we were aiming at. And therefore we were showing after some goal thesis. And I give you an example of one goal thesis. That's this year, that's a little bit more detailed. So it's called external costs. So the costs of pollution, accidents and so on, which is typically paid by the society. These external costs are included in the calculation of the transportation's operating cost. These have to be borne by the user at the very end. That was a general thesis that would be agreeable of all these guys sitting in this expert team coming from these companies. So it's not saying that I'm saying this. So we made this in this expert group. And you could think about discussing all these theses was kind of making a law, because everyone had to tell something on it. And everyone had to say, no, not this kind of formulation, take this word, we don't like this word, just change it again. So it was a kind of ongoing treaty here. But this was the very end of this formulation that we had. So this means that we have cost calculation that for the utilization of the transport services that has to include the full cost. So we have to be clear and transparent on the real costs that are there. And that also means costs of congestions, accidents, and the environment, CO2 costs, and so on. The promotion of incentives will be there for the development of better technologies, as we discussed them here. You can only reach this if you think about full cost. If you leave out the environmental cost, you don't have the incentive to do so. One example in Switzerland that we have now is that the road tolls, are heavily dependent on the class of truck you are driving. So we have a quite modern fleet truck in Switzerland. So this is the kind of incentive that we are having. So most of the trucks are Euro 6 or Euro 5 in there, because the cost difference is quite immense between Euro 4 and Euro 5 at least. So the providers will set more focus on the environment and safety, and we will have more transparency and so on. And this is only an example for the topic of financing. So how do you finance your transportation system? And we have clustered all the topics into these topics that are just shown on the left-hand side, like the international integration of Switzerland in the overall world context, or the European context. That was especially a point that given by the Swiss airline, to see how this comes in. The society and law topic, resources, space and energy, request or demand topics, planning and organization, infrastructure, the offerings or the service offerings of companies, and the operations that we're having. So these were the topics, and behind this there were overall 38 goal themes defining this vision that we were having. Of course, I cannot show them all here. Other topics you can see here. Users accept the compilation, forwarding, and assessment of traffic data for purposes of capacity planning. So we had this topic in this self-driving bus topic, or these mobile ticketing. So there you have immense amount of data that you could use for traffic planning at the very end, because you know which traveler is going from A to B and where and when he's going. But it's a big topic to implement this, because it's a kind of data safety and security and privacy topic. And so there are a lot of people against this. And this is also the enabling topic that we're having. So we think in 2050 this is an enabling thing that will be accepted, because there will be better services at the very end. Another example is traffic-inducing institutions contribute to the reduction of traffic peak hours. And this does not mean that the ones who are traveling are doing this, but the institutions who induce the travel. Just think about an event where you have a lot of people just going somewhere, or you have an employing company who wants to have the people starting at punctually 9 o'clock in the morning. So they have to think about changing something that you could maybe just shift these peak hours. So these are topics that were discussed in there. And then we had some recommendations that were coming up, or these tasks that had to be done, coming directly out of this thesis. For example, in the first point, so we had the same topics again, so the main overall topics. For travel to work and business travel, there is no tax relief anymore. That was one point coming out of the discussion. Discussion that these transportation systems should be financed in a self-sustainable way. And in Switzerland, we have the opportunity, if you're going, if you have to commute to your job, you could reduce your tax because of the traveling cost that you're having, because you're going for working. And this is the point of saying, okay, no, we don't have this, so they should all pay the same price. If you have a subsidize, not the transportation system should subsidize this, but others should do this. Because then you have the transparency about this in that way. Good. And now you see that there are some ideas. I could send the presentation at the very end out. If you give me your card or whatever, so I could send it so you can see all these detailed points at the very end. So finally, that's the things that came out as a kind of main learning. We should have an integrated master plan for Switzerland. So we did not build it, but we set some bases and topics, what we should see in Switzerland, how this master plan could be. So we don't have this. Other countries have this, like Germany thinking about such kind of master planning, more or less successful. The nationalization or what was it called? The control sector or state control of the transport sector. So we have a nationalization of infrastructures, but the control impact by infrastructure on guiding traffic just goes down. So because there are other factors that are coming up, especially if you look at, and that's the next point, information technology and data. You can see that these data is mostly owned not by the state, but by private-owned companies more and more. And you have to see that this is relevant for your planning. Just look at Google, for example. We need new business models that will be on the market in transportation. We have seen some ideas coming up in the startup scene. Just think about the Uberization of traffic, and so the politics are quite blind on this eye. So they have to think about these new possibilities of making business in transportation. And the approach where we have to go is we have to have some kind of pilot projects, just as we've seen also in this kind of session, that we can prove that this technology will work. And there is potential and learning from doing new business models, and maybe transportation could be organized completely differently like we know now. And this is the point where we are. And as I said at the very beginning, we had in mind when we started this with 2050. My view is now just seeing what is going on, seeing self-driving trucks now on the road in the United States. If you have seen the example of Budweiser and Otto's, we are faster than that. So also these things here, and that was the critical review of the CEO of the SBB, so the Swiss railway company. He said we are too far away, so it will be earlier. So that was his first point that he was giving. So the study looks like this. Unfortunately, it's in German, but those of you who are able to have this is quite free. You can download it on a homepage. Or I can send it as a PDF. So if you have a German possibility, you are free just to have a look in. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.